Okay. Yay.
Everyone,
Welcome back, everyone. And I'm sure we have interrupted many interesting conversations, new relationships established, and yet we're going to have this session. And the session probably triggers a little bit of, okay, another report, a lot of data, probably going to be very boring, but it's not going to be very boring. And there are 3 reasons for that. First one, the data in the report that we're going to share now is your data. So we've been really looking at web signatories, companies in the region, and looking what are trends and opportunities that we see. The second reason is really because you're going to hear these trends now very quick, some data behind this, but throughout the next 2 days, you're going to see all of these trends into action presented by you, not by us. So it's really a red wire for us for the next 2 days that we're going to have together. And third, and I think that's probably the most important one, it's not me that's going to present it. It's going to be in partnership with Aparajita, who is joining us from Value for Women. And let's get started, because we are already over time. So Aparajita, why did we write this report, and how did we get this piece together?
Thanks, Katya, and it's great being in this room with so much energy today. So I think this report and our partnership with Value for with UN Women and between UN Women and Value for Women was really exciting for us, because I think it just allowed us to sort of look under the hood, what exists, how do businesses think, and how are they actually going to move beyond commitment itself. As Value for Women, we are a global team working with locally embedded teams across emerging markets, very focused on driving practical action towards gender inclusion by businesses, both and private sector and public sector. So this opportunity with the report was really about helping us learn a lot from what can we really do that makes that incentivizes businesses, and especially large businesses that often don't think about gender as being something that's directly in their purview, where they're looking for more systemic action or government interventions to come in, for them to actually see how things can really move. And I know everybody here knows what WEPs are, but just as a reminder, if you need that, then it's good to remember that WEPs, the Women Empowerment Principles, are a set of 7 principles that offer business a very holistic framework to promote gender equality and women's empowerment. And that's not just limited to the workplace, but also to the marketplace community, and how we can build alliances and how businesses can work together towards these collective goals. So that was really exciting for us. And working on this report, looking at not just what we learned through the trends, but how does this affect a post-pandemic transition for businesses was equally exciting and important for us. I can talk a little bit about what we found, what are the kind of sources we looked at. So we mentioned some of this here, but the Trends report drew on a multitude of primary and secondary sources. We looked at over 2,250 companies that were already committed to promoting equality, gender equality in Asia. So in that sense, the data set is a little bit biased. It is a data set of people who have already who have shown intentionality, are already committed. But we are hoping that this can also inspire a lot of businesses beyond the ones that responded to the data set or are the current signatories. And then this data, based on this data, the report talks about how, despite companies' commitments, the concrete implementation piece is still a very small portion of the work, right? So we still have a long battle ahead of us. We still need to move beyond commitments. Some companies, and many in this room, have taken very solid action, and they have moved this towards having clear policies, clear implementation, but then there's so much more to be done. And then, Katya, remember that all this report was done in the middle of the pandemic. So, there was the effect of the pandemic on women in workforce, and women having care responsibilities was huge. And we saw a lot more commitment being driven. But COVID's impact on women and their participation was massive. And I think it's for sure impacted the kind of pathways that the businesses would take post-pandemic. So over to you.
And I remember when we were writing this report, and when we kind of what kind of questions we're going to ask. So we like, what impact does COVID have on businesses that are committed? I was said that, Aparchita said, a bit of a bias that committed companies, businesses to gender equality. Until yesterday, till this morning, actually, we said, let's do a Menti, we are all used to this, right? But we are post-COVID now, so we don't need all of the digitalization anymore. We use it, but we're going to benefit also a room full of people here. So my question to you, in the report, knowing that this was asked in 2021, how many of you think that COVID really has made a shift in this set of companies to rethink their work on gender equality? Everyone who thinks it did, please stand up. Did COVID had a positive shift or had a shift for companies to rethink their work on gender equality? Okay,
if you think yes, please stand
hand
up.
signs or stand up. So it's very beautiful from up here to see everyone. So I would say it's about 50-50, maybe a little bit more what you are saying that has had an impact. So let's look what the data said. You can sit down, we keep that moving up there, some more to come. So what have we seen in the first place, before we even come to gender equality as such? We have seen that 87% of the set that we have worked with, of the survey participants, said that they have started to rethink sustainability at a larger thing, which I think is a good thing as well. And then if we looked at gender equality, which is about 60%, so Alia said like 30% did not rethink, but 60% did. So there is some shifting happening. So I think what we thought is really great. Let's continue the movement of these companies. Let's get more and let's build on this. So that brings me straight to what we got out of the report were 7 trends, and we developed also 27 trends, really practical recommendations actually on how can we action up on these trends. So what we're going to do in the limited time we have, we're going to just go one by one, very quickly give you a little bit of a flavor, and you will hear more into practice later throughout the 2 days. So, trend number 1. Companies of all sizes and sectors have shown increased commitments to promote gender equality. Yet, actions are lacking. And I think we have heard this from many of you in the panel already and this morning as well. But let's start with the positive things. So during this period of time, we had a huge increase of companies in the midst of COVID that really made these commitments to the women empowerment principles. And we also asked them, why are you doing this? And 90% of the survey participants said, because it's simply the right thing to do. But also we heard things like, because it's really helping to retain employees and talent. We also heard things like, it's important to our CEO. That drives really why our commitment in the companies are stepping up. But we have been seeing also that not all of the actions that we want to see behind these commitments are actually taking place. But I don't want to go into what's not happening, but I think what we also see, when action is happening, there are key areas where it's happening. The first one is promoting women in leadership. We see workplace gender equality as a whole is the area where most companies invest in. And increasing in the first place awareness around gender equality amongst their employees within their organization. That's what we've seen where sort of the most traction is within businesses. And where we see on the other side where things are lagging behind is areas like setting very clear gender targets, report on them, expanding the thinking about diversity as such. And very many don't even have a real action plan in place. And I think, Amanda, you mentioned that 80%, I think you said, of your companies you invest in, they have an action plan in place. And we think these are actions that are actually quite important. But let's continue on the promoting women in leadership side of things. What have we learned about that, Aparchita?
Yeah, so I think moving on to the second trend, we see that Promoting women in leadership has been one of the topmost commitments and one where we've probably seen most action. And we see this across organizations, across private sector. In the first session, we were hearing our representatives from Malaysia talk about how there has been so much positive action in the country towards getting more women in those leadership positions. And I think those are good examples of seeing how we can drive this at scale. The finding that we have here actually resonates really strongly with WEP signatories. In about 87% of them from Asia region report that the companies have made significant or very good progress on this front. That said, the number of women in senior leadership position or middle management position, it still stands at less than a quarter. So there is obviously a lot more to be done. We see 30% of the companies that took the WEPs tool, talked about only about 30% have actually a time-bound, measurable way of metrics that they're using to see how this changes. So clearly while there is a huge amount of intentionality, there's a lot of action. We are seeing this being a top priority for companies moving forward. We also see that there is still a lot to be done. And if we do want to get more women in the workforce, we need to have workplaces follow more comprehensive gender-inclusive practices. And otherwise, we'll continue to see women dropping off the workforce. And we do see that workplaces that have more gender-inclusive practices can contribute to it. And I think that will lead to the next trend that you will talk about.
And I want to pick up on what we had heard this morning. And I think there was a lot of talk. I think Nadira inspired and triggered the conversation on care. And we've heard there's a direct interrelation or intersection between women in leadership, women's workforce participation and care. So one of my really favorite topics, to be honest, is the care economy, because I just think it's so fundamental for really advancing women's economic participation. And we're going to stay and see if you are up for non-mentee, and we're going to do and try another thing. So I haven't done this in a long time. It's the first time such a big full room post-COVID. So I'm going to ask everyone to stand up now, everyone. So in the research that we've done, we asked companies if they are providing childcare facilities or any form of subsidized childcare to their employees. So let's see if that's going to work. Who in the room thinks that more than 50% of companies providing childcare facilities or subsidies to their employees, please sit down. If more than 50% are providing any support in terms of childcare facilities, if you believe that, sit down. So we knew that's going to be difficult. Again, if you believe the companies that took part in this survey, if more than 50% responded that they are providing childcare facilities or subsidies to their employees, sit down. I report back, no one is sitting down. She did one thing. A good believer, we have more than 50% of companies. That would be amazing. I think Nadia would be great. We would have many more entrepreneurs who have businesses and provide these services. Who thinks more than 40% of the participants of the survey have childcare facilities or subsidies to their employees? 40%, please sit down. No one is sitting down. So we're now going to go in smaller steps. Who thinks 35% are offering childcare facilities and subsidies?
Ooh.
Still no one sitting down. Have faith in the businesses in your region. 30%. Okay, we have some people sitting down. Thank you, Pakistan. 25% we are. 25, come on, people, 25%. Okay, almost 2/3 of the room is sitting down. So let's probe 20%. Almost everyone sitting down. I'm going to ask everyone to sit down. So what have we seen in the report is 16%. No need for frustration, no need for disappointment. There's a positive side to this, as always. There are 30% of the respondents of the companies that took place that said this is going to be a priority for our businesses to move action on this area. This was in 2021. We are in 2023. I think this 30% is increasing. So let's stick with this trend. Let's have conversations today. We have also a session on family-friendly policies, for example. How do we get these 16% up? So that was a very interactive trend number 3. So workplace is not only care facilities, is not only leadership, there's more to it. What more is to the workplace? What did we see, Aparchita?
So I think with that, we'll move to trend 4 and talk about, how workplaces can prevent sexual harassment, any kind of sexual violence that's being reflected in the company's action. And we've seen trend 4 actually looked at that and saw that the global Me Too movement was very much reflected in the kind of data points we saw through this trend. And we do know that the economic cost of violence against women, both in workplace but in outside of workplaces, actually impact women in workplace massively. The numbers are pretty staggering. Over $1.5 trillion of GDP gets, it's 2% of the GDP, gross global GDP. So it is, we know that it's in the interest of companies to tackle this issue, but the part, I think the key part to remember is that oftentimes this violence is not just at the workplace, and it's not always visible. It could be in public transport, it could be in domestic settings, and why that affects women in the workplace is because, especially post-pandemic, we are seeing more and more women opting for hybrid workplaces. We are seeing organizations encouraging that as well. And if there is violence, even in a domestic setting, it does impact women's participation in the workforce. So we know that 81% of the WEP signatory, especially in the APAC region, have reported that they have implemented some kind of an approach or a policy to ensure that they have an environment that's free of violence, harassment, or sexual exploitation. But remember that, again, this data is not at all representative of the overall business sector in the region. This is the WEP signatory data. So that's still a very limited percentage, a very limited part of businesses. So one of the key actions that we've recommended is for companies to move beyond policies to provide more holistic programs that address violence against women in the workplace, but also beyond it. And I think that's where there's so much more to be done. And this is not just for the companies or the private sector, but I think there's clearly some signals here to be taken in for donors or for government that are looking at supporting businesses or building a more resilient workplace. And with that, I'm going to move to the next trend to talk about not just the workplace, but also beyond that. So how is there an opportunity for women to be more engaged in value chain and in marketplaces? Absolutely. I mean, we all know this, but oftentimes the first bastion that we see is, or the first milestone that we see companies focusing on is women in leadership, or how do they bring more women in hiring, but then go beyond that to look at how can women participate more in the value chain and marketplace. And I think it also brings us back to this important point about it's not just gender sensitization in the way you would see it at a human resources level, but every single business function in an organization or in a company needs to be sensitized towards gender inclusion, because oftentimes, the finance team might be left out of it, or business practices might be left out of it, and that works at the detriment towards this trend, because if they're not thinking about gender responsive procurement, if your marketing and communications team is not thinking about gender responsive marketing strategies, we're going to miss out as private sector stakeholders. So this trend really focuses on companies' engagement with their supply chain stakeholders. This could be around having more women-led businesses, women-owned businesses in their procurement pipeline. It could be about investing in women entrepreneurs that can actually support more holistic procurement processes that can actually bring in more resilient more resilient sort of businesses being involved in the company itself, and strengthening the supply chain. I think on our data side, sort of moving on to the next trend and keeping an eye on the time, This trend 6, talks about aligning gender commitment with community engagement activities. So often, a lot of us in this room are familiar with this as CSR activities, or any kind of sustainability reporting activities where that companies take towards advancing gender equality. And what we saw in the report through the trends was that nearly all the WEP signatory in the Asia region talked about gender equality as being one of the key drivers for them to deliver on their CSR activities. Most of them have a women empowerment component or a clear gender equality component of anything that's impacting women and girls, and SDGs. So over 95% were actually reporting that they have commitment and they have some kind of a direct relation to their activities. But the same data, there is difference between ambition and action. So have we actually seen them moving towards action? That's where we need to shift the needle. We know that companies can't do it alone. They need support. They need to rely on alliances. They need to learn from each other, but then be able to implement it as well. And I think that's where UN Women and UN Global Compact kind of organizations come in. How do you build these alliances that companies find worthwhile to engage with, and they know what to do with that commitment? As a company, I might say, I want to see more women. I want to create a project for women's empowerment, but how do I embed it within each and every part of my business? That's where alliances come to play. So with that, I'm also going to say that the other key area is also to drive that systemic change that alliances do, and think about data, metrics, and reporting, and that's where I'm going to hand over to you, Katya, to talk about that.
So speaking about systemic change, I just want to bring us back that we are, again, in this very biased data set of some companies in this region. So it's positive what we see here. So imagine that many, I think, Amanda, you know the exact number, how many businesses we have in Asia and the Pacific. If we can get these businesses move all together, I think then we're going to drive impact. So there is positive signal. So your actions, and you are the leaders of these communities here. How do we move this forward? And this only can happen if we work in alliances, in collaboration was one of the big things that you said as the needle mover. And how does this relate to trend number 7? And I think this is an important trend for all of us. So what we do see is also the biggest action area for the individual company to set targets and to report even internally before even thinking about externally. So we see already the action is lacking within a single organization. Not speaking about what we see in the universe of businesses, what are they reporting on? So this is where the biggest needle mover is. So I'm looking at our colleagues from Malaysia, from the government as well. If we could work together, the regulators, to really set and align at least on some targets, indicators, where we collectively push the needle forward, you within your business networks, in your industries, and push these indicators forward. When we then make this mandatory, I think then we see, first of all, what's happening, because we don't have the data. And then it's going to come and roll us up to that tipping point that we so urgently need to make that action happening. So that brings also the final number what we've heard. We have also interviewed quite a lot of stakeholders that are not businesses. And 85% or 88%, I think, were that said that we really need that collective action. We need to have regulators, governments to help to set these regulations to move forward. Really advance on ESG reporting, put a gender element into that and guidelines to support that. But also beyond the large companies, the huge driver of our economy are SMEs. So we need to also make sure that we help and provide guidance for the small and the medium-sized companies to drive themselves. And last but not least, I think it's important to support and provide guidance on how to set actually targets within companies to move that forward. So I think there's a lot we can do, and I think it's going to be exciting to roll up our sleeves the next 2 days we have together on how can we act up on some of these things. And that, Aparajita, and the very least number of minutes that we have left, what can we do, or what type of actions have we identified, just very briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are, when the report asked about priorities moving forward, companies largely chose the same issues that they've been focusing on, right? So the top issues that had over 60% respondents were really around increasing awareness on gender equality, promoting workplace equity, promoting women in leadership. And then the rest of them are priorities, but definitely much lower down the order, and very few sort of reported about doing something about it. So clearly there is a lot more space and a lot more collective action that we can all take towards future action and priorities, and that has to be across the value chain. So we move to this slide, we need to do everything possible that we can collectively to not just limit to the three that we saw in the previous slide, to actually moving across this whole sort of value chain. And it doesn't matter whether you're in Philippines or in Pakistan or in Vietnam or in India, think about institutionalizing your commitment by developing intentional and holistic strategies. And I can't emphasize this enough. I think the first panel was also talking about how companies really need to use more holistic frameworks to drive action. Tracking gender diversity and sex disaggregated data for leadership, for workforce, for client and value chain data wherever possible, and setting targets for change based on that data is literally the starting point for most businesses, and should be the starting point. And then moving beyond policies, it's great to have good affirmative policies, but how do companies ensure that they're accountable, that they're building accountability towards them internally, and equipping their partners and their employees themselves to be able to meet those targets? That's really key. So again, Katya, something that you said, use every minute in these 2 days to actually speak to each other. There are many stories of successes and failures in this room that we can all learn from. There are some great examples sitting here. Let's just find this time, use this opportunity to connect in person with all the people who are here, and see what kind of allies can we find in this room and also beyond this to actually drive this action forward. And we're here, and we're looking forward to learn from you as well. So thanks, Katya.
Thank you so much, Aparajita, for sharing all of this, for doing this research together, and I hope that sets us off for really exciting seeing on how this can be turned into action. So thank you very much.
Thank you.